Hello, welcome to biology class. This class is number 223, and we are going to talk about ecology, evolution, and climate change. So it's going to be an all-encompassing big picture term of biology. I'm starting us off with a picture of fungi, but we also have a full ecosystem here. So the fungi is Pleurotus oystriatus. That is the oyster mushroom. This is a wonderful edible. It grows in our area. It's also pretty easy to grow at home. So we can grow this in the lab or you can grow this in your kitchen. And I think it's mild, kind of lemony. It's a great edible mushroom. But the community is, look at this. We have a bryophyte. You remember that this is the haploid generation. This is the gametophyte. And then in this bryophyte, we have so many different types of little arthropods. We also have tardigrades, our moss piglets, or our moss bears, the water bears that live in moss. And we have all the critters that live on this tree and rely on this tree here. Looking at this bark, I can tell that it's a hardwood. It might be an oak, but it's a beautiful ecosystem here with so many different types of critters, even if we can only see a couple of them. So that's the way that we're going to start thinking this term. We're going to start thinking big picture about more than just the cell, more than just the organism. How do these things come together and how do they interact and what are their interactions like? So in case you haven't taken a class with me before, I want to make sure that I introduce myself. We have data to suggest that you can learn better if you feel safe and comfortable with the person that is teaching you. And so, hi, I'm Catherine. I prefer being called Catherine, so feel free to address all your emails as Catherine. If you don't like that, you're welcome to call me Mrs. Preach or Professor Preach. I like that too. I use she and her pronouns. Pronouns are what you use when you don't use someone's name, like this is her coffee cup or her plants are behind her. So please use she and her with me. I studied botany for my undergrad, which is the study of plants, and I studied mycology for my master's. There's actually not really a lot of mycology programs, so I say that, but in reality, on my degree, my degree is in ecology, evolution, and conservation biology. That's what my master's is in, but my organism was fungi. So I studied mycena, and all of my work was in mushrooms and on fungal life systems and taxonomy, but there's just not a ton of mycology programs. So I always say that, but it's a little bit of a, I don't know, it's true, but it's also like not what's all my degree. So I did study fungi, but this term, what we're going to be talking about, ecology and evolution, that's like my bread and butter. I love this topic. I'm very excited to talk about it all with you. I have two cats. I love my cats very much. Up here we have Parker. He's a little standoffish, so I don't have that many photos with Parker and I, but he loves to sit on the back of the couch right here. And then we have Max, who is a ham and loves to be held. I've shown you videos of me trying to lecture before with Max in my sweater. He's just a sweetheart. I love gardening and summer is coming slowly. It's going to be spring term now, but in a few months, I'm going to get to plant zucchinis and green beans. This is a zucchini variety that my friend grew last year. It was really good, but it's massive. And Max had the funnest time playing on it. And it looks like he's a witch riding his broom. I think it's such a cute photo. Look at his face. This is my planter boxes in my backyard. I'm also really into mushroom foraging and hiking. So this is a porcini. This porcini is actually from the Mount Hood Community College campus. It is a delicious edible. They are worth their weight in gold. They're actually by weight worth more than timber. So economically a very important mushroom. And then here, these are the buckets that we grow in lab. So these are oyster mushrooms like I showed you in the first slide, but these are what students have grown together. So really beautiful edible oyster mushrooms, easy to grow. I also love reading. If you have any reading recommendations, I read everything. I read mostly fiction, but I'll go sci-fi, I'll go romance, I'll go murder mystery, literary fiction, all of it. So anything you're reading that you're loving, please feel free to send it my way. I'd love to hear about it. And I learn best by drawing. So in an online format, we're not going to be drawing so much together, but it's my personal recommendation to you to write things by hand and draw things by hand. There's a lot of data that works better for retention than typing does or just viewing something does. All right, so let's talk about the class now we got to know you a little bit more. We are going to have labs on this online class, and now because it's ecology and evolution, some of them are going to require you to go outside. So please plan ahead. That means that if you work 40 hours a week during like normal hours, you might have to set aside time on the weekends, or if you work night shift, trying to do it in the morning or the evening before you go to work. These will be hard to do at dark. So please make sure that you're setting aside time to do this in the daylight. The reason it's hard to do it dark is a lot of it is observations and taking photos and measuring things that you can see. So please plan ahead. Our first two labs are definitely going to require you to go outside. Then we have two labs that are indoor. Diversity sampling is outside. You're going to have to be counting plants. So definitely outside for that. And then we get to your ecology experiment. So this is not the research paper. You're still going to do a research paper. That's for lecture. These are lab assignments. For this term, in week 6, you're going to design your own experiment, and then you're actually going to do it for the rest of the term. So you get the full experience of being a working biologist. So designing it's going to be inside, but depending what you design, you might need to go outside to collect your data. I have more to talk about with this, but it's going to be part of Lab 6. It will make sense when you get there, but it's anything that you really want to study in ecology that is practical to do. And I say practical to do because I often get people wanting to work with plants because I love plants, but plants are slow to grow. You need to be collecting all of your data within 3 weeks. And that's really not enough time for plant growth to occur. I'm also going to ask that you don't work with domesticated animals. So like figuring out what kind of food your dog likes best, that is not really an appropriate ecology experiment. However, the foraging behaviors of hummingbirds or ground squirrels or chickadees in your neighborhood, that would be an appropriate experiment. So making sure that you have enough time to do it and are not working with domesticated animals are really the only two guidelines for this. Otherwise, you get to get as into it as you want. I do have recommendations for you, working it all out, and you will talk to Professor Pooler about it. It's going to be awesome. So very much looking forward to that. And then the last thing we're going to do is present what you find. You're going to do a PowerPoint presentation and post it to Blackboard. You'll talk us through it. You don't have to show your face if you don't want to, but we do want to know what your experiment was like. Each of these assignments is the lab for that week. So your overall points do not change for this class. The ecology experiment is only worth 20 points per week. I expect you to spend the amount of time on this as you would the regular lab, so about 3 hours a week. Any questions? We will totally talk about it, and don't worry, you will hear about it before you have to get started on it. So that's the labs look like. Again, please plan ahead. You need to be outside during daylight. Next, we have the point scale. The point scale for this class is the same as the last two. The first one had homework to set you up with study skills. We no longer have homework in this one as well as not last term. You have your syllabus quiz. You're going to have your reading quizzes. You're going to have your labs. You're going to have your research project and exams. Again, this research project is you finding information, coalescing it, describing it in your own words, and citing your sources. That's 100 points. The research project is in lieu of a second midterm. We only have one midterm. The labs in which you're going to do your experiment, there's not like a separate project associated. It's just the labs for that week. So your experiment's going to be really awesome, really fun, but it's not a project. It's your lab assignments. Any questions, email me. We'll talk about it. And that gets us to our survey question. So if we were doing this in person, I would have you turn it in. You don't have to email it to me unless you want to. This is just for you to think about. I want you to think about your own personal position on this. So ask yourself the following question. Based on your knowledge currently, what is evolution? Do you personally believe in evolution? Why or why not? And would you choose to accept, reject, or I'm not sure in response to this prompt? Human beings, as we know them today, developed from earlier species of animals. Pause the lecture, take a moment, and reflect on these questions. So how do Americans respond to these questions? The acceptance rate is in blue. The rejection rate is in peach or red. And then the I don't know rate is in green. So we can see how things have changed since 1985 to 2020. And you can see the percentage of people that answered each way. So I think it's important also to think about the caveats of evolution. If we pull our American public further, this is also from Pew Research, we have this as an answer to our beliefs about human evolution and the role of God. So here we have all US adults, net 80% believe in evolution. So that's quite high. This is newer research than the last slide I showed you. So the last slide was net about 55, but that was in 2020. So here we've got data from 2024, and we've increased significantly, net of 80%. Of those people who believe in evolution, we have three options. Humans evolved and God had no role. Humans evolved guided by God, and humans have existed since the beginning of the time. And so it's interesting to see these breakdowns based on our religious affiliation and whether or not you're religiously unaffiliated. And there's trends, and it's totally cool. I'm putting this out because I think it's fascinating, and I think it's important to note that there is not a whole like wall divided between religion and evolution. Sometimes it's set up so that the two seem like they're opposing ideas. And this data suggests that a lot of us have figured out how to make the two things work together. And I think that's a really nice idea as someone who teaches evolution and thinks a lot about how to make teaching evolution acceptable to all of my students, those who are unaffiliated with religion and those who are strongly religious. And so please know that whatever your religious background is, whatever beliefs you have, whether or not you personally accept evolution or not, you are welcome in this classroom. Your beliefs and ideas are valid. I am here to support you. And if you ever want to talk about them, email me. This is for everyone. We are not trying to exclude any of our students here. Now, when we talk about human evolution, there's a lot of misconceptions that come up. I Googled human evolution, and this was one of the first images that popped up. Take a moment to look at this image and try and figure out what might be wrong with it. So the things that I see that are wrong with it is this makes it look like we were apes in the future or in the past. And that's not true. Evolution doesn't say that we descended from apes because apes exist today. What evolution says is that we have a common ancestor with all mammals, apes included. And so when I hear anti-evolution rhetoric, it's often saying things like they're trying to make a monkey out of you, which is not accurate. We're not saying that apes were our ancestor. We're saying that we shared an ancestor with apes. So that's a misconception with evolution. Further, this makes it look like a linear progression, right? Like it's one step at a time. It's slowly changing. We're constantly improving. All of those things are not really true. Evolution as a definition is just change over time. Sometimes the change leads to more complexity, but sometimes it leads to less complexity. Sometimes it's gradual, sometimes it's really quick. There isn't a plan, and there isn't a increasing in betterness or like more complexity that is designed into it. It's just a process. So this makes it look really intentional, and it makes it look like we're getting better. And both of those things are misconceptions. Something else that I see that I think is problematic is this is a progression toward whiteness. There's no reason that this person has to be getting whiter over time. So that's another issue with evolution. Evolution is often used to promote racist ideas. And so we're not going to let that fly in this class, and we're going to call it out when we see it. So then what is evolution? Evolution is just descent with inherited modification. What does that mean? It means that you don't have the same genes exactly as your parents. So you're different than your parents. My cats are different than their parents. These plants behind me are different than their parents. And every generation, there's going to be continual differences. And in life, some of those differences will be beneficial and some won't. So that's inherited modification. It's a theory because it's been well tested and supported. So we're not calling it a hypothesis. We think that evolution exists. We have a lot of data to support it. And we'll talk about that data too. So it's described as a theory, just like the theory of gravity, or cell theory, which we accept that living things are made out of cells. And it's guided by this process called natural selection. So when you hear natural selection, people often think survival of the fittest. Okay, but what's fittest? Fittest doesn't mean fastest. Fittest doesn't mean strongest. Fittest means the most able to reproduce successfully and pass on their genes to the next generation. So fittest is not physical, fittest is reproductive. And of these plants behind me, maybe some of them would have a trait that made them more likely to reproduce, like their flowers were more notable to pollinators, or their photosynthetic abilities were stronger, and so they were more able to survive. And if you survive longer, you have a higher chance of reproducing. So fitness is the ability to pass on your genes to the next generation. Natural selection plays a role in that because who is the winner and the loser of passing on their genes is determined by the environment. So in my environment here, all of these plants are going to be losers because I don't have any pollinators in my house. These plants are going to live out their lifespan and then they're going to die. They're not going to get a chance to reproduce because their flowers are never going to get pollinated. And so in this natural selection environment, the fitness is 0. If these plants were outside, maybe some would be in an environment where there was more bees, and that would lead to higher success rate. And so natural selection is the environment's role of choosing unconsciously, this isn't in a thought process, but of who is the winner and who is the loser and who can pass on their genes. We can describe evolution in 2 visual pictures. We have birds on the left. So we'll look at this first. This is natural selection in a nutshell. We have 3 birds. They are eating beetles. Here's a population of beetles. And the birds say, yum, green beetles are favorite. So if these birds choose to eat green beetles more than orange beetles, over time, they will start to kill off the green beetles. And that means that the orange beetles will be more successful. So over a course of several generations, we will have a population that's mostly orange because selection has chosen that green is not a benefit. Selection has chosen that being any color except green is a benefit. So the birds are acting as the force of natural selection, and the fitness here is not being green. In this picture on the right, we're looking at giraffes. We have different adult giraffes of various heights, and some have longer necks. And if they have longer necks, they are more able to reach the trees, and then they're more able to get food. And if they have food, they live longer, which means that they can get to sexual reproductive age and maybe reproduce. If these shorter giraffes cannot get food, they're going to starve to death. And if they starve to death, they're going to have a less likely chance of passing on their genes because they will be sickly and then they will be dead. So over time, the ones that struggle to find food are not as successful at living and reproducing. The ones who can find food are more successful, and more of their children get their body form inherited from their parents. And over time, we have longer, bigger giraffes. And so here, natural selection pressure is whether or not you can access the food. And the response is that the ones that can access the food have a higher fitness. Here's another example of natural selection in action. There is an organism hidden in each of these pictures. One is a bird, a caterpillar, a lizard, and a bug. So take a moment, try and find them. All right, in the top left here, I have an owl. This is the owl. Here's its ear. This is its head. Here's its body. Here's its feet. There's its beak, and there's its two eyes. In this picture here, I have a caterpillar. It's got frilly legs sticking off all of its sides. These are the veins of the leaf. You can see that the legs are going in opposite directions. And this is its back. So it's got a strip down its back that matches the venation of the leaf. Here I have a gecko. Here is its tail. Here's its body. There's an eyeball. This is its face. Here's one of its hands. And then here's its back leg. So it's camouflaged into the bark. And then here I have an orchid mantis. So this is the orchid that it mimics. This is the praying mantis's back leg, butt, thorax, front leg, and then here's its face with its two eyes and its antennae. So this is natural selection in action because each of these organisms is perfectly suited for its environment. That orchid and that mantis look so similar because it has evolved the ability to mimic the organism that it lives on. Same for the caterpillar and the owl and the lizard. They look like the things that they live on because that has been a benefit to their fitness. Imagine if I took this caterpillar and put it right next to this lizard, it would stick out like crazy. So the environment is choosing what is successful and what is not successful. And again, it's not conscious. This isn't like a thought process. It's just what works in that given environment. So over time, if these orchids started to die off, this showy praying mantis would become a really easy target for anyone that wanted it. So this is an example of coevolution. The orchid and the mantis have evolved together. The mantis is now reliant on the orchid's existence, and vice versa, because these mantises play an important part in the life cycle of the orchids. And so fitting into your environment gives you a benefit of surviving. And if you survive, you might be able to reproduce, and then you can pass on those genes to your offspring. The offspring of that orchid mantis will be pink and look like an orchid, just like their parents did, but maybe they'll have different modifications because we're not exactly the same as our parents that make them more or less suited to live in this environment. So here are our data that supports evolution. The first is that we can directly observe evolution occurring. We're going to talk about this in the next lecture, but we can see it every day with things like antibiotic resistance, right? So if I am cleaning down a table in the hospital and I'm using like a really strong chemical wipe, I might wipe out 99% of the bacteria. That's like what Lysol advertises, right? But what I didn't kill, that 1% that survived, it survived because it was immune because of some mutation to its DNA from its parents that made it unkillable from the Lysol. Now, that bacteria has an advantage because it's all of a sudden the only one in the habitat and it can grow and reproduce. And I'll try and kill it with Lysol again, but now I will kill much less than 99% because more of the population inherited those genes, making it resistant to whatever it is you're using to kill the bacteria. We can see evidence for evolution in fossils. We can see transitional fossils that change from one species to another over time. We're going to talk about that in detail later too, and it's really cool. We can see shared characteristics between organisms, both living and extinct. We also can see evidence that we're all related, given how similar our DNA is. So my cats and I are like 90% the same DNA. These plants and I probably share 50% DNA. I know I'm like 50 to 60% DNA related to a banana. And it's not that I have the same DNA as a banana. It's that there are things inside of my cells and a banana cells that have existed previously and are retained. Things like the structure of the plasma membrane and what kind of proteins are used. Like we use a lot of the same things because we have a similar evolutionary history. We also have embryological similarities. So during development, humans have a tail, we have gill slits, we have webbed fingers and toes. We're not born with those things, But we do see that same development pattern in all animals, all mammals especially. There's a point in development where you can't tell the difference between like a dolphin and a dog or a pig and a human, just because we all follow the same pattern. And that same pattern is indicative that we have evolved a similar type of gestation over time. And then lastly, we have biogeographical evidence. Biogeography is a study of how the tectonic plates have moved and how that has affected life. And we'll talk about that in more detail next time as well. Lastly, I want to finish on some vocab that we're going to use to talk about evolution throughout the rest of the term. The first is the way that we use the word theory as biologists versus the way theory is used in daily life. So when I say theory to my friends, I'm saying like, I have an idea, I have a guess, I have a hypothesis. But in biology, the word theory means something that has been repeatedly tested and all of the data so far supports the hypothesis. It doesn't mean it's capital T true, because we can't prove things as true in science, right? We can just say we haven't disproved them yet. Evolution is change over time. Where those changes come from, it's what you inherit from your parents. And then natural selection is the process of some organisms being better at reproducing than others. We also have another idea, natural selection versus artificial selection. So these plants behind me, they've been bred to be houseplants. They have been artificially selected for because they can grow inside where the temperature is the same year round and the light is fake, like this isn't sunlight. So that is artificial selection. Another example would be dog breeds. So we have bred dogs to have different traits. That's artificial selection. I mentioned I love gardening. A beet and chard are the same plant. They're the same species, but we have bred one for the root and we have bred one for the leaves. That's artificial selection. That was not chosen by nature. It was chosen by people. So natural selection, the actual environment is favoring or disfavoring some traits over others. In artificial selections, humans or whoever is cultivating the thing, like ants, they farm. So ants or humans are choosing which traits they're going to breed and which traits they're not going to breed. We have two different types of evolution. We have microevolution, which is a change in gene frequencies and allele frequencies over time. And we have macroevolution, which is the creation of a new species called speciation, or the loss of a species called extinction. So macro is gaining or losing a species, and micro is what happens between every generation. So just little fluctuations over time. Microevolution can lead to macroevolution, and macroevolution does change gene frequencies. And so the two are related, but they are technically different. Now we have fitness and fecundity. So fitness is your ability to survive and reproduce and have offspring. Fecundity refers to how you reproduce. So humans, we usually have one baby at a time. Cats, when they have babies, they have on average 4 babies at a time. Something like a fish, they're going to release hundreds of eggs at a time. Something like a fungi, they're going to release thousands, maybe millions of spores at a time. So fecundity is how you reproduce, and fitness is whether or not your genes successfully get to the next generation. We're going to talk about adaptation in lab, especially, but an adaptation is a trait that gives you a fitness benefit. And then there's this idea, acclimatization. So if you're going to acclimate, that means that you personally adjust to something. Now, this is another vocab issue. So when I say that I adapted to an idea to my friends, I mean that I adjusted to it and I've accepted it. That's actually acclimate. So in biology, a single individual cannot evolve. We need to change our entire population for a species to evolve. So if a single individual is doing something different, it acclimates. Like if I move to an area that's hot, I will eventually acclimate to the temperature differences. I will not evolve an adaptation to the differences, but maybe some of my offspring would have a mutation that made them better suited to that environment, and that could be an adaptation. So our adaptations are based on genes that can get passed on to the next generation. And acclimatization is something that an individual can do over their lifetime. We have a vocab word to describe whether or not a feature is evolutionary related or not. So an homologous structure means that there is a common ancestry pattern to the feature. The example is the forelimbs of different types of mammals. So here we have a human, a dog. This is not a mammal, this is a bird, and this is a whale, which is a mammal. In each of these forelimbs, we see the same structure, one humerus, a radius and an ulna, all of your carpal bones, and then your phalanges. So this pattern has been retained over time. It is a similar pattern in everybody that's related. These are homologous structures. Analogous structures are things that help you fit into your environment. So they might be similar, but it doesn't mean that they're closely related. For example, here we have a flying fox. This flying fox has a big old wing, beautiful structure. And here we have some type of raptor, maybe a hawk. I'm not great with identifying raptors, but some bird of prey. And it also has a wing. Both of these wings mean that they evolved to have flight. It does not mean that these two things are more closely related to each other, because a bird we know is a ruminant dinosaur and a flying fox is a mammal. So these features are not closely related, but they both exist because they're selected for by the environment. Convergent and divergent evolution refer to this as well. So this is an example of convergent evolution, having wings so that you can fit into your environment. This is an example of divergent evolution. Here we have 3 mammals. Each of these mammals have a very different structure, but that's because they're trying to fit into their environment. So here the whale has a flipper because it wants to swim. The dog has a front leg because it needs to walk on them. They're tetrapods. And we have modified forearms for grasping. So this is divergent evolution. These things are closely related, but their structures are different. And this is convergent evolution. These things are not closely related, but their structures are similar. And then a theme for all of our classes is that structure relates to function. So what these things look like is an indicator of what they're used for, and we're going to see that trend throughout the term. I hope that was interesting. Have a great day and email me anytime. Bye.